just talk about why we do it, what it is useful for, and hopefully answer. I mean, I suspect other people in this room might also have podcasts, and Carl's here. I'm sure he's done something, and see what their perspectives are as well.
Yeah, I think one of the most important first questions is that you brought up is what does podcasting mean? And so I just wanted to do a quick brainstorm and what does a podcast mean when you hear the word? What do you think of it?
Audio plus subscription file.
Okay, audio plus subscription file.
Sounds good.
Downloaded.
Well, I'm
Portability.
Portability. Yeah.
Listening on my bike ride.
Listening while I walk the dog.
Yeah.
Listening while you work.
Well, yeah.
Our postdocs do this podcast while they're,
Pipetting.
yeah.
It's fun when you're going through your first 50 emails in the morning. And,
Fill that other channel.
Listening to something interesting.
You just said media. It's gonna be video too.
Media. Yeah, and I think that it's really grown. It first started out just as the term podcast, so having the iPod aspect, being able to download an MP3 to your computer and subscribe to something that you wanted to listen to. And it started out just as audio, but like you said, it's evolved to include many more formats, audio, video, and it's really funny that within the podcast community, like podcasting, the term is not taken seriously. And there was a hope in the beginning of podcasting. I started podcasting in 2005, and there was this huge hope of podcasting as the new wave of media, and that it was really going to be this new industry, and people were going to make all sorts of money, and there were these conferences, and it was this huge thing. And then over a few years, reality set in, and people realized that companies didn't necessarily want to advertise on your podcast because you only have, a couple thousand listeners or 100 listeners, but you just didn't have the numbers of listeners to be able to support advertising revenue, and it wasn't worth it to the advertiser. So the money wasn't coming in. And so podcasting, and podcasting is also seen as this amateur endeavor. And so it's just not taken seriously. And I've been talking with a lot of people recently, and Veal Laporte at This Week in Tech, who's a very esteemed podcaster, we don't call it podcasting anymore. We do shows. We create content. We are doing just what the big media people are doing, and if we call it podcasting, they're not going to take us seriously. So if you want to do something that is, that is fine, and it's a podcast and whatever, and you're just doing it for fun or enjoyment for yourself, call it a podcast. That's fine. If you're doing it and you want to get into it as an endeavor that's a professional endeavor, that you want it to become something that advertisers are going to look at, that you want it to be taken seriously in the media world, don't call it a podcast. So that's my lesson number one.
Yeah. And I'll come at it from a slightly different angle. So obviously, my introduction to podcasting was with Leo and This Week in Tech, and I've been probably listened to about a third of his podcast. He's got 2 shows. He's got too many. So I started blogging about over 4 years ago now, and I've been doing it for a long time. And blogging is what I do at night, my day job. I tend to spend most of my time on. And about 3 years ago, I started randomly recording video when the eyesight came and uploading video became really easy. First thing I realized was recording by yourself is absolutely boring. So stop doing that. It's just crazy boring. Tried doing a solo podcast, that was also boring. It's a monologue. About 2 years ago, a friend of mine and I, I've known him since we were undergrads, we talk every week, and we talk mostly about bioinformatics and programming. He's a crystallographer, I'm a reformed computational biologist. And we decided, hey, one day we just turned the recording on, and we recorded a whole conversation. That one never made it online, but it's actually fun to listen to. So we just turned it. And someday when we are rich and famous, take it out of the wall, but I still have it. We said, okay, let's convert it into a podcast. And at that time, actually, I go back to Leo, was talking about the fact that what you should be focusing on is not something that everybody in the world wants to listen to, but maybe only about 50 people in the world want to listen to, but they'll be very interested in it. Very, very niche, very, very focused. So we started Coast to Coast Bio, and we decided the only people who'll ever listen to us are bioinformatics people or scientists who care about programming, because both of us like informatics and programming, and that's pretty much what we talk about, and we make fun of. And what really worked was he and I don't agree on half the things.
Which is great.
We just disagree half the time. I mean, we're still civil to each other. We haven't beaten each other up yet, and it works out really well because he's an academic. I work in industry. The dynamic just works out, and I wish we did it every Sunday, and I'll come to that. Whenever we are not finishing papers or not traveling, we spend an hour. Nowadays, we do it a little more systematically. We decide what we're going to talk about before we get on, and we just record it. And at least 1,000 people every week seem to want to listen to it, so I'm not complaining. So it started from the completely different way. There's no expectation of ever making it professional. We've both got our own thing that's talking about things we care about. And there's people out there who now, there's enough people who are interested, they'll send us, hey, can you talk about this new Python library that came out, or some, Rails 3 or something like that. That's the other sort of, it's still the amateur aspect, but focusing on things that you really dig and talking to, and working with somebody who you have a good rapport, I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think that gets into the point of figuring out, are you doing what you're doing for yourself? And if so, that's absolutely fine. Are you doing it to reach somebody? Or are you, or what is your specific purpose? Do you have a particular goal in mind? And those are really important questions to ask yourself if you're just getting started and getting into it. I don't know how many of you are podcasters, have done podcasts? Just one. How hard do you find it if you kind of lose sight of your goal and what you're doing? Have you ever found that you just kind of start losing interest in what you're doing and it's kind of hard to keep going? Difficult to keep it? Yeah, there's a phenomenon called pod fade where
When did that set in?
It's different for every person, but it is something that people get really excited because they're interested in talking about a subject that's interesting to them, and they're really into it and excited about it, and you go, and do I have to do that this Sunday evening? Man, do I have to? Because you've given yourself this responsibility that is, it's a hobby most likely. You're not getting any money for it. You're doing it for your own enjoyment and your own love and enlightenment. But sometimes it's hard to keep that going. And so if you're going to do it, if you're going to get into making podcasts, making these shows, take that into account. Is it okay if one day down the road you just go, I'm done, and is that okay? And then thinking about who your audience is also very important. Are you trying to reach your peers? Are you trying to reach the general public, which is who I'm interested in reaching? Are you interested in reaching students? Are you interested in reaching people in industry? Your audience plays a large role in figuring out how you're going to approach the subject, whether it's going to be, two guys sitting around and talking, or like a guy and a girl, what I do, talking about stuff, and how you put the program together. So This Week in Science, the program that I've been doing for years, my co-hosts through the years, I've been with this guy Justin since about 2005 now, since we started podcasting, and he's worked out really great, but I've had a few co-hosts through the years, but the main trait that they've all had in common is that they're not scientists. And so I come at things from the scientific background, having spent a lot of time in labs, in the field, teaching, in academia, and then bring in my trusty sidekick, who Justin's a car salesman, but he's really interested in learning stuff, and so he asks questions when we interview people, or when topics come up. He's more likely to ask questions that I take for granted. So in that way, it helps bring in potentially the questions that our listeners